Good morning. With the holiday season upon us, it's often a very joyous time, but for some, a very lonely time as well. Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy is on a crusade to make the nation a little less lonely. He's doing that while keeping a close watch on the wars in Israel and Ukraine as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and mapping out goals for the 2024 U.S. Senate. Senator Murphy is joining us now. Senator, thanks for being with us. I want to start with the news. We're going to get to this loneliness issue, but there's so much to talk about, particularly in Israel. You made some headlines over the past week talking about maybe conditioning aid. Where are we on more aid for Israel and what's happening between Israel and Hamas?
Well, great to be with you, Eric. Listen, one thing is clear. Israel has to defeat Hamas. It has to eliminate Hamas's military capability so that what we saw, the horror of October 7th, can never happen again. That's in the United States' interest as well, because these terrorist groups, if they get away with acts like October 7th, then they will have more confidence to come after the United States. So we've got to get Israel aid. I plan on supporting military aid to Israel. I've expressed an openness to making sure that our aid that goes to any country, Ukraine, Israel, other allies, is used in accordance with U.S. law and in accordance with international law. That's generally what we do when we send military aid to other countries. But make no mistake, we stand with Israel. Hamas has got to be defeated, and that is going to be the work ahead of us in the Senate before we break for the end of the year.
And that sentiment that Hamas must be defeated has been echoed really on both sides of the aisle, up to the White House and other places. But the tricky work of there are these hostages, there's, pauses. I don't know if ceasefire is even really the right word, but pauses while there's hostage exchanges. As you're looking at this from your seat, what do you think the big keys are we should be watching for as we move this thing forward?
Well, let's give credit what credit is due. President Biden and his team actively negotiated a temporary stop in hostilities to allow many of these hostages to be released. That just wouldn't have happened without Joe Biden. It's the reason that people elected him, because he is an experienced international leader at times of crisis. I have not supported a ceasefire because that sounds indefinite to me, and I just don't think that we can afford to let Hamas off the hook. I support these short-term pauses in fighting to get hostages out, to let humanitarian aid get in. But ultimately, Hamas is still a threat to Israel so long as their leadership is at large, and Israel has to address that.
This has led to some discussions, particularly with some of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle, about the ongoing war in Ukraine and the funding going there, and now having competing interests in different parts of the globe. Is that a tricky topic as we head towards the end of 23 and into 24?
Well, we have to get aid to Israel, and we have to make sure that Vladimir Putin doesn't march into Ukraine and then into Europe, which would draw the United States directly into conflict with Russia. Sometimes people wonder why the United States is involved in Ukraine. Well, it's because history tells us that megalomaniacs like Vladimir Putin don't stop. Right now, we're in a tough spot because Republicans in the Senate are saying that they will not support funding for Israel or Ukraine unless we change policy on the border, which I support, but that's a really tough thing to do while Ukraine and Israel are hanging in the balance. So I'm right now the chief negotiator on the Democratic side to try to find some compromise on border policy. Hopefully we will be able to get that in the coming days and weeks, and that will allow us to make some progress on the border, but also get Ukraine and Israel what they need.
It almost as if you can read my bullet points. I was going to go to that border issue next, Senator, and I wonder if you think it's productive to link those issues. Is it productive in the sense that there is the need for the international aid, and so maybe some gains get made on border, or are we now starting to mix two things that shouldn't be in that same conversation?
I think it's terrible that these two issues are being mixed together. It's not that there isn't a crisis at the border. There is. But we all agree on Ukraine funding. There's a majority of votes in the Senate to get money to Ukraine and to Israel. And I don't understand why we just don't capitalize on that agreement and save our allies. There is a reason that we haven't done immigration reform in 40 years. I want to do it, but I don't want to, essentially give a giant gift to Vladimir Putin because of our inability to come together on immigration funding in a handful of weeks. For the crowd that never wants Ukraine or Israel to get money, this is tactically to their advantage, saying we won't support money for these countries and these crises unless we unwind a 40-year disagreement on immigration reform. But I'm in the room. I'm the person trying to cut this deal. I've been able to do really big bipartisan deals in the past, like on guns, and hopefully we'll be able to do the same on immigration.
Well, and you're, as you said, you're more than just in the room where it's happening. You're making these negotiations. You're leading the negotiations. So you did something similar with gun control, something people said that there could never be a bipartisan bill. You can argue about the contents of the bill, but there for sure was a bipartisan bill. Are you taking some of those same approaches? Are you taking some of the lessons you learned in that other politically thorny issue to try to move this border security forward?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. I mean, I think people in Connecticut know where I stand on both of these issues. I want a ban on assault weapons. I want universal background checks on immigration. I want a tighter border, but I also want a pathway to citizenship for all the people who are here undocumented right now. But I think people in Connecticut elected me to stand up for my values, but then to compromise, to try to make Washington work. I think people are sick and tired of Democrats and Republicans yelling at each other. And so, yeah, I have become one of the people in the Senate who can get these big bipartisan agreements done, because I do believe part of my job is to compromise and not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so we were able to do that on guns. I think people felt really good about the fact that for the first time in 30 years, we got a big gun control package done, and hopefully we'll be able to do the same thing on immigration. I see it as a privilege to be one of the people that is looked to at moments of crisis like this to try to get these bipartisan agreements done.
I want to talk to you about loneliness. It's a big topic. You and I have talked about it before. There's a great profile of you in Vanity Fair talking largely about that topic. And one of the things the author Eric Lutz talks about is that you're seen as a rising star in the Democratic Party. You're young, younger than many of your colleagues. You've had that big success on gun control. And he almost says it's peculiar that you've chosen loneliness as a big issue to talk about. Why is it so important to you?
Yeah, I am young compared to the rest of the Senate, but I don't feel very young anymore, having just turned 50. Listen, I just think that we have to create a new way of having a dialogue in this country about policy and politics. When you start on controversial issues like healthcare, immigration, or abortion, everybody just retreats to their corners. But what really motivates people in their daily life is how they feel. And one of the things that people are feeling today is aloneness, is loneliness. There's a remarkable survey on the number of friends that people have. Just 20 years ago, only 3% of Americans had no friends. Today, that number is 12%. Americans are spending way less time today on a daily basis with friends and family than they did 30 years ago. And that comes with real costs, healthcare costs, costs of suicide and addiction and overdose, political costs, breeding political instability. So by talking about an emotion like loneliness, it's a way to bring together the right and the left, Republicans and Democrats. And if we sort of realize that we're all feeling the same things, I think it's a lot easier to then bridge that conversation to policy. It's easier then to say, okay, if we agree on how we feel and we talk together about how to feel that feeling that we don't like less, maybe we can get to policy more easily, like social media regulation or laws that give us more free time so that we have to work less and have time to socialize with others. I just think it's a really healthy conversation for us to have. I know it's a little strange for a politician to be talking about friendship and aloneness and loneliness, but when I talk to people in Connecticut, that's what they talk to me about, is how they're feeling and what is government doing to help me feel better.
Well, the first time you brought this up, I think I asked you, it's kind of that I'm from the government and I'm here to help joke. And how are you going to solve loneliness? And you said, well, that's one of the things we're looking at. There is now, a bill that you're supporting talking about things like an Office of Social Connection Policy in the White House, things like that. But then, of course, as soon as that stuff comes out, you get people on the far right saying, aha, here's a lib trying to mandate that we have friends. People on the left saying, how dare he say I should talk to conservatives about this? So is this just showing the problem, Senator?
Yeah, listen, I think we can find solutions, and I think that you can see the evidence of that already. One of the things that does drive loneliness is our addiction to social media, and kids today are reporting levels of loneliness that we've never seen before. Rates of self-harm amongst teenagers, especially girls, are at epidemic levels. And you are seeing Republicans and Democrats working together better on social media regulation than ever before. Senator Blumenthal has a bill that's a bipartisan bill. I have a bill that's a bipartisan bill. So I don't think it's all talk. I think that there is a growing bipartisan agreement that we have to tackle this sort of immense phenomenon of social withdrawal that's happening. And maybe it will start with social media regulation, especially for kids.
Just one last thing. We're almost out of time. But in that article in Vanity Fair, they raised the question. The author asked it just in the text. Is Chris Murphy a visionary rising star, or is he spending hard-earned political capital on a hobby horse? How do you think we'll figure out which is the truth?
Well, I mean, do we make progress on things that allow us to connect back to each other? Do we pass a social media regulation bill? Do we raise the minimum wage so that people have to work less and have more free time? Do we see less people retreating to, really dangerous political identities because they now have more identity connected to family and friendship? I guess that'll be the proof. But I frankly don't think a lot about, whether the issues I work on have political salience or whether they advance my political career. I just think this issue of loneliness matters to kids and families in Connecticut, and I think that that's my job, to work on things that matter.
All right, Senator Chris Murphy, thank you for being with us here on CT23. We'll have you back again soon.
Thanks a lot.